History tells the story of the world and of our lives. Sometimes that history goes bump in the night. Broadcasting from the center of oddity and the supernatural in Central Florida, it's the History Goes Bump podcast.
You spooktacular people. Welcome to History Goes Bump Redux. I am your host, Diane.
And this is Kelly.
Kelly, on this Redux, we're going back to the Peoria State Hospital. When we originally did this episode, we were joined by Sylvia Schultz, who pretty much wrote the book on the place called Fractured Spirits, and then she did another one called More Fractured Spirits or something like that, or More Ghost Stories from Peoria State Hospital. There's a lot of spirits here, so I'm looking forward to bringing it to everybody. And this was a great asylum. Usually when it comes to asylums, you're like, ooh, scary, horrible things happen in there. Not here. This was a good place. Are you ready to go back?
I'm ready. The Peoria State Hospital opened in 1901 in the village of Bartonville in Illinois. The asylum was home for the mentally ill for 72 years, and it provided state-of-the-art care for the time. But it was also the scene of some very tragic circumstances. Many people died here, both patients and staff. Peoria State Hospital is rumored to be haunted, and it very well could be for a number of reasons. Bartonville was once Native American land. Many tragedies happened at the hospital, and the area where it is located is surrounded by water and limestone. There seems to be many fractured spirits here at the Peoria State Hospital. Join us as we explore the history and hauntings of Peoria State Hospital.
When one says haunted mental asylum, people automatically assume pain and fear and abuse. Your mind automatically goes all American Horror Story on you. Mental asylum usually equates with haunted, and we surmise that that is because horrible abuse occurred there. But that wasn't the case at Peoria State Hospital. This asylum was an asylum in the truest sense of the word, a place of security, a place where people could go and be cared for and loved like they were family. Much of what made Peoria State Hospital the pinnacle of care for the mentally ill was Dr. George Zeller. He was one of the first superintendents of the asylum, and he was absolutely the most influential. And he had the most amazing way of treating the mentally ill. He treated them like family. He and his wife Sophie never had children. They considered the patients their children. And they passed that work ethic along to their staff, which helped make the Peoria State Hospital a place of compassion, caring, and respect for the patients that they treated.
The village where the asylum was built is called Bartonville. Bartonville is just a few miles south of Peoria, which is the biggest town in this area, and that is why the hospital was called Peoria State rather than Bartonville State. Bartonville sits on a bluff overlooking the Illinois River. That bluff top on which Bartonville sits is a perfect storm of things that will cause a place to be haunted. It sits just a few hundred yards away from the Illinois River, which is the longest river in the state. The hilltop itself is crisscrossed with tiny ravines and underground springs. If you go into the basement of the Pollock Hospital, which is one of the remaining buildings of the asylum, and you stand in the morgue, you're actually standing on 3 feet of natural spring underneath the concrete under your feet.
Dun, dun, dun. Can you imagine that's under the morgue? Wee-hee.
There's also a whole lot of limestone around. The Bowen Building, which is the administration building, is built from limestone blocks that came from the oldest quarry in the United States in New Bedford, Indiana.
And I should have changed that to was, because at the time that we originally recorded this, the Bowen Building was still there. It no longer is, but we're still going to be talking about it. So there's just a swirling maelstrom of things that come together to make Bartonville an extremely haunted place. When the French settled in this area in 1680, they founded Fort Crèvecoeur, which is across the river and a little north of where Bartonville is now. And in their journals, the French officers of the fort, wrote of the spot that we now call Bartonville as being a Native American place of habitation. We don't know whether it was an established village or if it was simply a burial ground, but we do know that there was human habitation here at that time, and there's been for thousands and thousands of years. The bluff top was a perfect place for people to settle down. The Barton family first came to central Illinois in 1829. W.C.H. Barton would found Bartonville around 1878, and the town was named for him. Mining was the big industry here at that time, and the place filled up with miners and became pretty rowdy. It was described as being, quote, populated by dogs and drunken miners.
Oh my.
Hey, come live with us. We have a bunch of dogs and drunken miners.
Barton was the mayor of the village, and his wife got very involved in the community. She formed the Peoria Women's Group, and they spent much of their time visiting almshouses in the state. Almshouses in the late 19th century were horrible places. The worst of them were no better than barns. If you had $25 for a license and an empty barn in your backyard, you could open up an almshouse. Many people thought that the mentally ill couldn't feel cold or heat, so a barn should suffice.
How is it that you can't feel
I don't know.
heat and cold just because there's something that's a little broken in your brain?
Pretty terrible.
That's not what's broken. I guarantee it.
Some of the county almshouses weren't too bad, but some of the private almshouses were really, really wretched, horrible places. This women's group decided to form their own asylum, and so they donated the land on which the asylum was built. Because they donated the land, all the money the state would provide for the asylum would be poured into making the buildings as modern as possible, at least as modern as they could be for 1902.
This new hospital was going to be unique in that it would be a place for long-term care of the mentally ill. Other hospitals would try to treat patients and send them on their way, even if they were deemed incurable. Construction began in 1895, with the main building being finished in 1897. This was done in a style that made it look like a feudal castle, which wasn't really the feeling the women wanted to give to patients. And Dr. Zeller was also overseeing all this. He walked through the building, and this was built based on the Kirkbride plan, which he hated. And that Kirkbride plan utilized a great big building with wings to make it easy to access all the patients. But the plan was old-fashioned and out of date very quickly. And we've talked about the Kirkbride plan a lot of times when we talk about asylums, because nearly all of them had been built that way. The building would never be used and was quickly razed. Not just because of the design, but apparently abandoned mine shafts on the property undermine the integrity of the building.
Oh my gosh.
Maybe you should check to make sure you're on bedrock before you put a big building on the land. And can you imagine they built this big castle-like place and never used it? Just tore it right down.
What a waste.
Yeah. The new style that was implemented was a cottage system, and there were 33 buildings. And the day that it opened, it actually only had 17 of those buildings, but it would grow to 33, and then it's going to grow some more, as we'll talk about. The advantages to a cottage system were that people with the same affliction were housed together. You have all the epileptics together. You have all the alcoholics together. You have all the people suffering from depression together. It forms a natural buddy system. You're with people who understand the way you're feeling every single day. With the Kirkbride plan, you could have somebody who's suffering from mild depression in the same room as a raving schizophrenic, which doesn't do either of them any good. With the cottage system, you had people living together that understood each other. And the way that Dr. Zeller put the cottages together was that he put a married couple in charge of each cottage. So now you're really going to get that family feel. And it did. It made the place feel more home-like. He wanted to give every impression of these people being at home because this was their home. Dr. Zeller also forbade the use of locks. The only locked wards were the violent wards for the men and for the women. That was the only ward that was locked. Other than that, the patients were free to come and go as they pleased. He said, "These people don't lock their doors at home. Why would we lock them in when they'd come to us for help?"
When the hospital first opened, it was called Illinois Asylum for the Incurable Insane, but Dr. Zeller quickly had it changed to Illinois General Hospital. Medical boards would regularly inspect the hospital, and it was considered first in the treatment of mental illness. The place also had the #1 nursing program in the country, and they held that for 34 years.
That's amazing. It's this little itty-bitty town, and it's got the best one in the country.
The hospital always ran as non-restraint and non-sedation, and the staff only worked 8-hour shifts. This was all under the guidance of George Zeller. He designed the hospital and implemented all its practices. Bars were taken off windows and used to make a zoo. I love that.
Yes. Take those things off there.
He confiscated straitjackets and had a massive collection.
He'd get excited every time somebody came in one because, of course, he was going to get them out of it immediately. But then he had a pretty massive, and he was very proud of that collection. The Zeller family was from Switzerland and immigrated to America and settled in Illinois before George was born. George's mother was French, and people talked about how beautiful she was. She gave birth to George in 1858. She homeschooled him and his 3 siblings until her death, which came when they were all still young. George was only 7. In his biography, he wrote of her, "She was destined to survive but 10 years, and her only regret at passing to the great beyond, an event which her infirmities foreshadowed, was that she was leaving her 4 young children to face, motherless, the uncertainties of the future. I have seen many children thus deprived, and the scene always brought back to me that lonely night when death entered our house and took from us what we needed most and what never could be replaced." I thought that was beautiful. And then he would really understand when these children lost their parents, what it felt like. George learned a lot about medicine from his father and even helped him mix medicine. George went to medical school and married Sophie Klein in 1889. Dr. Zeller started his medical career fighting cholera in the Philippines with the Army. This, of course, also gave him this heart for people because these were really poor and destitute people there that he was taking care of. He was not a trained psychiatrist, so you'd be like, why is he being put in charge of an asylum? But the hospital, they really wanted him as superintendent because he was so well respected. And he was the perfect man for it, obviously. Dr. Zeller did leave Peoria State Hospital for a little while to become the superintendent of Alton Asylum, but Peoria soon was asking him to come back. Dr. Zeller died in 1938.
Staffing and a lack of funds forced the closure of the hospital in 1973. At the time, there were 63 buildings on the property. 4 of the buildings were dedicated hospitals. Many were demolished over the years, and only 12 still stand. The Pollock building is in much of its original state. The hospital now runs as a museum and offers tours, both historical and paranormal. There are 4 cemeteries on the property.
Yeah, it's my understanding that different organizations owned different buildings, and so they each were getting a different level of care. And the Bowen building, as I said, was open the first time that we recorded this, and now it got torn down because it was starting to get into sad shape as well. And they still struggle to try to keep the museums open. If you want to go take a tour in the winter, I was looking just to look, and you have to schedule something with them because they're not open at that time, really.
And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors.
On our original episode featuring Peoria State Hospital, as I said earlier, we were joined by Sylvia Schultz, and she told us about the most famous patient at the hospital. Her name was Rhoda Derry, and she was brought to the asylum by Dr. Zeller. Her story was one of the great tragedies of mental health care in Illinois, and it's one of the great success stories of the Peoria State Hospital. In a nutshell, Rhoda Derry was born in Indiana in 1834. She moved to Illinois with her family, grew up in Adams County. She was the youngest of 8 children, probably a little bit spoiled. She was a farmer's daughter, and when she was 16 years old in 1850, she fell in love with the 16-year-old son of a neighboring farm family. His name was Charles Phoenix. Now, we don't know how far Charles and Rhoda's relationship went, but we do know that a couple of years later, Charles asked Rhoda to marry him, and she said yes. So it sounds to me like that relationship was going pretty far. Now, the Derrys were absolutely poor. They were dirt farmers. They didn't have 2 coins to rub together. The Phoenixes, on the other hand, seem to have been a little more well off. And Nancy Phoenix, Charles' mother, was having none of this relationship. She was not about to let her baby boy Charles marry one of these dirt poor Derrys. So she accosted Rhoda, and she said, "If you do not release my son from this engagement, I will curse you." Now, this is something. An ultimatum like this is something that really would have gotten Rhoda's attention, because her grandmother, Moll Derry, was a practitioner of Pennsylvania Dutch hex magic. She was known for being able to cast and remove curses. So talking about witchcraft in front of Rhoda Derry really would have gotten her attention quickly. It would have been something she would have believed. It was a few weeks after that confrontation with Nancy Phoenix that Rhoda seems to have had some sort of manic break.
She raced into the house declaring that Old Scratch was after her, another name for the devil. Family lore says that she went into her bedroom and started spinning around on her head like a top. We don't know whether this refers to an epileptic fit, perhaps. What we do know is that in the wake of this love affair that had gone so terribly wrong, she started to self-abuse horribly. She clawed her own eyes out. She beat her front teeth in. Her family cared for her at home as long as they could, but in 1860, her mother died, and her father could no longer care for her at home. He was so down on his luck that he had to move in with neighbors, and they were not about to take Rhoda in too, so he had her committed to the Adams County almshouse. She was a violent patient, and she wouldn't keep her clothes on. They had to tie her clothes on with clothesline. She was so unpredictable that she would put anything into her mouth. She would eat chicken, bones and all. Anything she found on the floor would go immediately into her mouth.
She was so violent that they had no choice but to put her into something called a Utica crib. Now, a Utica crib is just exactly what it sounds like. It's a crib, just about long enough for an adult to stretch out in. But if the adult is tall, like Rhoda apparently was, you can't stretch out in it. You have to lie in it in a fetal position. The Utica crib is designed to keep patients in just overnight. And so that you know, it has a top that comes down on it too. That's what keeps you in there. So it's like you're in kind of a
cage.
Flat, yeah, basically that is what it is. But she was so violent and so destructive that she ended up spending decades in the Utica crib. She finally calmed down enough that they were able to move her to a box bed. Again, not big enough to stretch out in. When she was let out, she was cared for by other feeble-minded patients. She lost the use of her legs. Her limbs were so atrophied that they were drawn up to her chest. She could not stand. Dr. Zeller was not only the superintendent of the Peoria State Hospital, he was also the state alienist, which meant that he had oversight of all the state almshouses, and he made it his business to rescue the most pathetic abused cases. He went to Adams County in 1904, and he saw Rhoda in that box bed, and he said, "This patient is coming with me." And the superintendent of the almshouse, Jacob Wolf, did not want to let Rhoda go. He was afraid that the almshouse would be blamed for her condition. Dr. Zeller basically said, "If you do not release this patient to my care immediately, I will shut your institution down." And he had the power to do that. The train from Quincy, Illinois got in very late to Bartonville that night. It was about 1:30 in the morning before the train could get through. There was a washout on the tracks. So the train chugged up to the top of the hill, and the nurses and the attendants were waiting there at the storehouse to move the train. Patients were being transported on boxcars. There were about 60 patients that had arrived from Adams County, and their attendants made sure to take all the straitjackets off and take all the manacles off because Dr. Zeller didn't like that. So the nurses and the attendants of the Peoria State Hospital escorted the patients off of the boxcars, and they noticed that at one end of the boxcars, there was this big wicker laundry basket full of clothes. And they were like, "Well, okay, I guess this is patient's clothing."
This basket was taken off the train, too. So 2 attendants grabbed each end of this big wicker laundry basket, and they humped it off the boxcar, and they put it down with a thump on the concrete landing of the train station. And there was a squawk from inside, and the lid popped up, and the clothes parted, and there was Rhoda in the basket. Her hips had atrophied so much that she could not sit in a wheelchair. She had to be carried around in a basket. That night, for the first time in 44 years, Rhoda Derry slept in a bed with clean white sheets. She became known as the daughter of the institution. She gained fame as the woman who was carried here in a basket, and Dr. Zeller used her as his poster child. He said, "This is what happens when you let a human spend 40-odd years trapped in a Utica crib," and then he pointed out how well the hospital cared for her. "This is a state-run institution. She has no bed sores. Every time she messes the bed, the nurses are just like that, cleaning the bed for her." He said, "We need places like this to care for women like Rhoda."
Rhoda could no longer see, but the nurses made sure that she experienced the hilltop in any way that was left to her. They let her sit out there in the gardens and feel the sun on her face and smell the flowers and hear the birds singing. They took her to dances and let her listen and clap along to the music. It was amazing to see what a little care and love could do. They say that she never smiled when she got there, except for when Dr. Zeller came into the room. Then she just lit up. She knew he was her savior. And perhaps it was because of this great turnaround for her life that Rhoda Derry is said to be one of the spirits at the hospital. She passed away in 1906, and her headstone reads, "They built this place of asylum so that no other human would suffer as you. You taught us to love and feel compassion toward the less fortunate. May you find peace and warmth in God's arms."
Apparently, she picked up the habit of chewing tobacco when she was still in her teens, and it's rumored that she would tell your fortune in exchange for a chaw of tobacco.
All right, that's a hell of a deal.
If she knew that you had chewing tobacco in your pocket, she would crab along the floor on her hands and knees and knuckles. And when she got to you, she'd sit down and she'd tug on your pants leg and beg for some chaw. So if you are anywhere on the hilltop and you smell chewing tobacco and you feel a tugging on your pants leg, that's Rhoda's spirit. Sylvia told History Goes Bump, I was at the Pollock Hospital a few years ago and we were in the women's ward. I was with an investigating group and the energy in the women's ward was kind of quiet that evening. Not much was going on. So I shared the story of Rhoda with them. And pretty soon after that, we decided to rejoin the rest of the group at the front of the building. As we were walking out of the women's ward, every single last one of us smelled chewing tobacco.
Isn't that amazing?
It's very cool.
Rhoda liked having her story told for sure. There are other spirits here because there was a lot of death at the hospital. Tuberculosis ran rampant here, and there was even a tent colony before the Pollock Hospital was built in 1949 that housed the TB patients. Eventually, the Pollock Hospital was built, and it's the most active building on the property. The paranormal activity hits all the senses. People see shadow people in the hospital and also out in the graveyards. Disembodied footsteps are heard, as are audible sighs. Sylvia heard tubercular breathing once with a group of investigators. A group of investigators smelled something that they described as Christmas with pine scents and such when they were sitting in the men's ward of the Pollock Hospital. This is probably because they used white pine herbals as a decongestant. Some investigators have tasted blood in their mouths, kind of like coughing up blood as if they have TB. Some people have even thrown up from it, so they're investigating and it's so gross. Now, I was listening back to the interview I did with Sylvia to get these stories, and as I'm talking to her about that, I was just amazed that this could happen. Like, how are people getting a taste of blood in their mouths?
Like I did.
Yeah, and now
at the Exchange Hotel.
Yeah, and now 8 years later, we're re-recording this, and I'm sitting here with someone who has experienced that very same thing. So you can imagine as I was listening to this yesterday, taking some notes down and stuff, I was like, oh my gosh. How strange that I was just like, how does that happen to somebody that, it's like, does the spirit jump in you to make you feel the same thing they did? Or how does that happen? And now I'm like, I still don't know how it happens, but I know it can happen.
A little girl ghost likes to hang out in the basement of the Pollock Hospital. People have named her Elizabeth. She seems to be 5 years old and walks with a limp. Her EVPs are very garbled, and she is very playful. She likes to make the EMF meters light up. A mean spirit hangs out in the morgue of Pollock. No one is sure if he was a patient or employee, but he has a foul mouth, and once Sylvia asked him what he wanted, and out of the spirit box came the word, whores. Guess he knew what he wanted.
Yeah. No doubt about that.
He's a bully and likes to press his finger between shoulder blades.
So it'll make your neck hurt and everything like that, and I wouldn't doubt that he likes to get his finger between your ribs and stuff, too. That just kind of shows that if you were a bully in real life, you probably are a bully in the afterlife, too. There were 3 deaths in the Bowen building. This had been the nurses' dormitory and their classrooms. A housekeeper who had diabetes fell into a diabetic coma and was taken to a room where she died a couple days later. Dr. Zeller died in his 3rd-floor apartment in the building, and a few months before that, his wife Sophie had died in the apartment. It was said, when the building was still there, of course, it was demolished in 2017, so we'll never know, but Dr. Zeller and Sophie had haunted the Bowen building, which is so disappointing that they didn't try to save that because, as important as that Pollock Hospital is for the history, how much more important is the Bowen building because that's where Dr. Zeller lived. So I would want to have kept that and made his apartment into its own, museum.
Right.
And that kind of thing. And plus, if that's where their spirits were, I mean, we know a spirit can go wherever they want pretty much, but it's just you destroyed their home. Cottage B1 apparently has reports of full-bodied apparitions, disembodied voices, and radios tune themselves to religious and country stations and increase their volume. At least it's going for, some good music. It's not like heavy metal, highway to hell stuff. T-Don Monation wrote on Reddit, when I was 15 or 16, a friend and I decided to walk over to the cemetery because we'd never experienced much in the actual Bowen building, short of some weird but questionable events in the tunnels under the grounds. On this night, we walked down the road. It was dark, but we could see all the way down the road thanks to the streetlights. We were walking past the building known as the tuberculosis ward when suddenly we looked up and maybe 25 or 30 feet in front of us was this black humanoid-like figure. It stood like a man and was a normal man's height, but it was all black. It didn't even look like it wore clothing, but you couldn't make out any actual physical feature. Nonetheless, It was as if it was cloaked in darkness or couldn't be perceived by us. This thing took the shape of a human, but everything inside that shape was pure blackness. And it just stood there, and we waved to it thinking somehow, despite my previous words, that it was a person. And it didn't wave back. I don't know that I'd want it to wave back. I hope it doesn't see us. It didn't move a muscle, and so then I took a step toward it, and as soon as I did, it took a step toward me, and much like some horror movie, when its foot hit the ground, I felt the most vile energy emanating toward me. Isn't that weird?
Yikes.
It's like a shadow figure with some kind of energy. And I guess my friend did too, because we both just turned around and ran until we made it back to the main strip of town from the outer limits where the hospital grounds were. I saw something, and it doesn't add up how it wasn't there the whole time we'd been walking down the road, and then maybe 50 feet from the cemetery, it just appeared while we were looking down for a second, standing there in the open like there wasn't anywhere anyone could hide. Pretty darn creepy.
One of the legends told about the hospital is about a man named Abe Bookbinder. Dr. Zeller had assigned him to the hospital burial corps, and he did a good job. He even mourned every person that he helped bury. This man passed away, and Dr. Zeller, along with 400 of the patients and staff, saw his spirit mourning at his own funeral. They were so startled by his appearance that they opened his coffin to make sure he was inside. Old Book, as they called him, was in his coffin. This story gets weirder because there was this big elm tree in the graveyard that Old Book had leaned up against when he mourned, and it began to wither and die. Several crews tried to remove the tree, but every time they made an attempt, they would end up running from the tree that they claimed was crying. The tree finally fell down by itself in a storm.
Yeah, I mean, the story is they would take an axe to it and hit it, and it was like it would scream.
Oh my gosh.
And cry. So,
aw, poor tree.
Yeah, I don't know what was going on there, but they never were able to take that tree down until it finally just took itself down. The care at Peoria State Hospital was unlike what we have heard about other asylums. Is it actually the positive feelings felt at Peoria that are causing some spirits to make this their home in the afterlife? Maybe they just don't want to leave. It was such a good place for them. Is Peoria State Hospital haunted? That is for you to decide. Well, I think we need to check out that Pollock Hospital sometime. I don't know when we'll be in that area of Illinois, but sounds like a great place.
Definitely.
Lots of activity. Sylvia investigates it all the time, and they always get a lot of great stuff there. Want to thank you guys for joining us for this Redux. I've been your host, Diane.
And this has been Kelly.
You take care now. Bye-bye. Kelly, on this Redux, we're going back to the Peoria State Hospital when we did this originally on the... I got a frog in my throat.
Ribbit.
And they passed that worth ethic.
It's
a worth ethic. I don't know what it is about it. Like when it has THs coming up and I always put it into the word in front of it.
It sits just a few hundred yards. It's a few hundred yards away.
Is that, what kind of measurement is that? What is that? Like, do you have a ruler for that?
But Dr. Zeller quickly had it changed to Illinois.
I'm from Illinois.
I literally was thinking earlier when I was reading Illinois how funny it is when you hear people pronounce it that way, and then I went and did it.
Well, what a waste of an S. Why put an S there if you're not going to use it?
Poor
Come
lonely
on.
S.
Because her grandmother, Mulderry, was a practitioner of Pennsylvania Dutch Pennsylvania. It's hex magic. It must have gotten my tongue already. What is it with some of the young people these days that they don't punctuate? They just write a huge run-on sentence. No commas, no periods, no capitalization. Every time I come across one of those that I want to put in that's an experience, I'm like, egad. We were walking past the building known as the tuberculosis ward when suddenly we looked up and maybe 25 or 30 feet and maybe... Freet? 30 feet!